Yeah, I figured it was only a matter of time before I'd have to talk about this one, and with the new Indiana Jones movie out, I guess now is the time. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Now, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is the fourth Indiana Jones movie. We thought it was all done in 1989 with The Last Crusade, but nope, almost 20 years later, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg got back together to do one more rodeo with the Indiana Jones franchise, or at least that's how they thought of it at the time. And I remember when this movie was coming out, there was a lot of hype for it, although a little bit of trepidation. You know, Harrison Ford was in his mid-60s at the time, and he was no spring chicken, so how's he going to do all them crazy stunts? And watching it now in a world where I'm anticipating watching Indiana Jones in his 80s do the exact same thing, I think him in his 60s is looking pretty good. It's actually pretty funny how time will do that. You know, back in the day, everyone's like, oh, he's too old, and watching the movie, you're like, he's not as good as he was back in the 80s. But now, in a world where we're getting an 80-year-old Indiana Jones, a 60-something-year-old Indiana Jones isn't too bad. That's probably the thing that surprised me the most going back to this movie, because I haven't seen this movie since 2008, 2009. I remember getting it on DVD when it came out and watching it a few times. I actually watched it more times than I think most people ended up doing. So I'd say around 2009, maybe 2010. That's when I realized it just wasn't as good as the other three. And it's kind of an awkward note to end on. When you're binging the Indiana Jones movies, you just want to binge the first three. That's the key Indiana Jones territory, those original three movies. And when you see Indy and his dad and Sala and Marcus just riding off into the sunset at the end of The Last Crusade, it doesn't get better than that. But all that being said, I don't think this movie's as bad as its reputation suggests. I still wouldn't say it's good, but it's not the cinematic disaster that everybody said it was back in the 2010s. There's actually quite a bit that I like about it, and Harrison Ford being one of those things. Harrison Ford just is Indiana Jones. It was perfect casting back in the 80s, and it was still perfect casting in 2008 when this movie came out. Because this dude does put in the work, and he is still that Indiana Jones that you know and love. He's got that charm, he's got that smile, he's got that world weariness, even more so that he's older. But he's not such a grumpy old man like Luke was in The Last Jedi. They don't completely butcher all the nuance of his character. He still is Indiana Jones. He's just aged a bit, and he should retire, but he's not, and he's actually kind of on that cusp of will he or won't he, and it is an interesting place to put Indiana Jones in this kind of movie. But my problems with this movie really boil down to two main issues, the first of which is the one that everybody loves to talk about, and no, it's not the nuking the fridge, it's the MacGuffin, the Crystal Skull, the aliens, Roswell, New Mexico, Little Green Men from Mars, that whole thing, moving it into the 50s. So I see what they were doing. They wanted to move Indiana Jones into the 50s, and they thought the aliens were the way to go, and I guess when you break it down like that, it kind of makes sense, except none of that feels like Indiana Jones to me. Indiana Jones has always been after ancient artifacts of some kind of religious importance, right? He tackled Judaism in the original Raiders of the Lost Ark. He tackled Hinduism in Temple of Doom, and Christianity in The Last Crusade. These are all religious in nature. I don't know, for me that's just a step too far, especially when there's so many other world religions to tackle. They could have done ancient Egyptian mythology, they could have done ancient Greek mythology, the Golden Fleece. That would be an interesting Indiana Jones adventure. Or if they wanted to play it really safe, they could have dipped back into the biblical stories, and believe me, there are still plenty of options there. So yeah, I just don't think aliens were the right way to go, but they went there, and now we have to kind of suffer the consequences. But my second big issue with this movie is the structure, the writing of the story, the plotting. Because the first movie, while it is a globe-trotting adventure story, the actual narrative is pretty straightforward. It's point A, point B, bunch of fun stuff in the middle. You're trying to find the Ark, you want to get there before the Nazis do. That's it. Temple of Doom, kind of the same deal. You got to get these stones back because the bad guys have them, and you got to get it back to restore fortune and glory to this village. And the third one is admittedly a little more complicated, but not that much. It's just Indy looking for his dad at the end of the day, and his dad just happens to be looking for the Cup of Christ, the Holy Grail, and so that kind of dovetails right into that. Not that complicated. Pretty simple. This one, most of it is just Indy being compelled at gunpoint most of the time to help the Russians find the Crystal Skull and El Dorado, City of Gold. But when that's not happening, especially earlier in the movie when they're not really compelling him as much. Indy doesn't really have a driving motivation, a reason for going on this adventure. And before you comment down below and say, oh, Indy had a motivation, I'm gonna say it right now. Because after the opening, when he is being forced by the Russians to uncover secrets, he runs into Mutt Williams, played by Shia LaBeouf, and he finds out that one of his old colleagues, Dr. Harold Oxley, got kidnapped, and now they're kind of on a quest to find out where he went and see if they can't get him back. Which to me just sounds like a sloppier version of his quest from The Last Crusade, because while that movie actually had an interesting father-son dynamic that needed to be repaired, and that was still relevant even after he found his dad about halfway, and here it's about halfway too, there's not really a relationship that needs to be mended, or at least none that the plot really focuses on. You could make an argument that, okay, in the background, if you pay attention to certain glances of certain characters, especially Shia LaBeouf's character, there are some moments of that, but that's not really the driving force, and Indy really doesn't seem to care all that much about Harold once he's found him and sees his mind all out of whack. Yeah, he's a little upset. But really, Harold could have been anybody. They could have switched him out with Abner Ravenwood. They could have switched him out with Sala. Could have switched him out with anybody, and he would have had about the same reaction. And then once again, when they find him, it's just more pressure from the Russians to find the skull, find the city. And again, what's Indy's mission? What's his agency? What's the thing he needs to learn? What's his arc? He doesn't really have one, and it's really upsetting because the best I can come up with is, oh, we just got to return this skull to where it came from. And well, that's not nothing, especially given his character journey through all three of these movies, from grave robber to adventurer to actually respected archaeologist, and now he's the kind of guy that if he sees something that doesn't belong, he's gonna put it back. And that would kind of be interesting, except it's not interesting at all, and the movie doesn't dwell on it, and the movie doesn't really bring it up, and I might as well just be making excuses. And I'm not so fond of this movie where I'm just gonna be making excuses. Although watching it again, I did kind of hope that it would be better than I remembered it, that, oh, maybe there is some gems in here. And I will say the gem here is Steven Spielberg's directing, the lighting, the cinematography, for the most part. When it's practical and it's interiors, most of the interiors, or even if it's an interior set that's made to look exterior, the controlled lighting, the directional lighting, everything looks really good, really clean. The camera movements, it's all top tier Spielberg. He did not lose a step coming back to directing Indiana Jones. He knows how to shoot these movies. The only problem is that now we have CGI, and in 2008 CGI was actually starting to look real enough where you might not notice it sometimes. There was a lot of CGI in that first Iron Man movie, came out the same year. We had the technology, except Indiana Jones just isn't that type of movie. You don't need CGI in an Indiana Jones film. They didn't need it back in the 80s, and they didn't need it back in 2008, and they still don't really need it now. The stunt work, the practical effects, the choreography, the fire, the explosions, all of that tangible destruction and mayhem and violence, that is such a key element in Indiana Jones' identity as a franchise that Disney made a whole attraction out of it, the Indiana Jones stunt show. Try and tell me stunts aren't a crucial element in Indiana Jones's identity. And to the movie's credit, there isn't nearly as much CGI as I thought there was remembering it back. There's actually quite a bit of practical stunt work. The motorcycle chase going through the university, that was mostly practical. That was actually really fun to watch again. Not only was there great motorcycle and car stunt driving throughout that whole thing, there was actually quite a bit of comedy that actually landed for me. Not a lot of the comedy in this movie lands. A lot of it can be super cheesy and cringy and a little over the top. I don't know, there's something about that sequence that really connected with me and I liked it. But that's not all. You also have the opening sequence in the warehouse, the Area 51. Most of that's practical. You see Indy running up boxes all the way to the top. Yeah, Harrison Ford actually did that. A man his age, I can only hope to be in such great shape when I'm in my 60s. He is killing it. But then we come to the jungle, and it's really when they go into the jungle and they have that big deforestation thing that's just cutting down trees left and right. From there, really until the end of the movie, it's just a big CGI fest. And while there are some interesting practical stunts hidden away in there, little hidden gems of, oh wow, they actually did that, that's nice, most of the big stuff is all CGI, and it looks really fake. I don't know what really happened, because again, 2008, we had Iron Man and The Dark Knight, same year as this, And this just looks so much worse. I think it's the overexposure of everything. There's certain glare and a certain high-key, overexposed shine on everything when they get into the jungle to the end of the movie. Early on, you don't get that as much because a lot of it's interiors and it's a little more contrasty and there's more directional lighting. But towards the end of the movie, yeah, it's that kind of War of the Worlds, Minority Report, overexposed Spielberg style that he kind of adopted at that point. It doesn't really work for Indiana Jones. If you're going to go that high-key lighting with just everything is lit and you can see everything, just go practical, because you can't hide the seams. You can hide the seams a bit more if it's a dark room and you have some sprinklings of CGI in there, but when it's all blown out and bright as day, people are gonna tell. I guess here's a good time to talk about the supporting cast. And Shia LaBeouf, he's got a lot of baggage as an actor, and putting all of that aside, just how he is here in this movie, he's actually not that bad. I can see why Spielberg cast him in this role. He plays that kind of 50s anti-establishment greaser really well. And aside from the first time we see him where he's wearing that Marlon Brando jacket and hat combination on the motorcycle, admittedly looks pretty goofy there. But once he takes that hat off, he just fits right in, he embodies the character, and he actually is a pretty good sidekick to Indiana Jones. Indiana Jones always needs a sidekick, whether it's Sala or Short Round. I actually see Mutt Williams in this movie as a kind of aged up Short Round, where Short Round was a literal child. This is more the teenager, the kind of person that Indy was to his dad. And I like that dynamic. I think it's fun, and I think Shia LaBeouf does an alright job. But the thing that I always enjoyed about this movie is that they got Karen Allen back to be Marion Ravenwood, the one that completely stole the show in Raiders of the Lost Ark and all the other girls have paled in comparison to, is back here, and she hasn't missed a beat. She's just as charming. She's got that same smile that just melts Indy's heart, and she's got that tough ruggedness. She can verbally spar with Indy, and it's just fantastic. Karen Allen, great job. Glad to see her back. It's a little weird that we got her for about half the movie, but plotting wise, I don't see how you could have done it any other way, and that reveal is something really nice when you just see her come out of the tent and you're like, oh yeah, that's Marion. But funny enough, we actually do have an Indy girl throughout the entire movie, and that's Cate Blanchett as I can't remember her name. I honestly can't remember her name. That's how much of an impression she left on me. She's got a great look, and she's clearly Russian, and she does her job. She's got the rapier, and she's memorable in appearance. I can picture her, but I just can't remember her name. What was? Somebody tell me in the comments what her name was. I'll be like, oh yeah, that's her name. And Cate Blanchett does a fine job in this role. It's actually the only time that we've had a female adversary for Indiana Jones. Even Ilsa in The Last Crusade, while she was an enemy, she was kind of on and off. She was also the love interest. This woman is not a love interest. She is all business. She wants to get these skulls. She wants to get this knowledge. That's probably my biggest gripe with her, is that she's just kind of bland. And while she'd make for a great action figure, a Halloween costume, or just a video game playable character, especially with that sword, she doesn't really have that much personality. Look at the other villains like Belloc and Mola Ram. They were villains, yeah, and they were single-minded on their goals, but they were having a blast just cheesing it up for the camera. Belloc ate a fly. Mola Ram ripped a dude's heart out and shook it at the sky. Like, these will leave an impression just how unhinged these people are. And Donovan, well, Donovan's also not the most interesting, but I would chalk that up to the whole twist villain angle, and I've already talked about that movie. But here they really had an opportunity to give this character some charisma, something that will make her go toe-to-toe with Indy in an interesting way, and they really don't do that. And the last thing I'll say about the Russians is that she has this henchman who I don't even know if he has a name. Maybe it's just the whole Russian thing. I can't remember the Russian names as well as some of the other names, and that's on me. But her big henchman dude is in the majority of this film, and when you first see him in the beginning of the movie and you see him fighting Indy on this rocket car and you're seeing it count down to blast off and they're really going at it. Indy has a pretty impressive stunt in the beginning where he's on this chain and he swings and kicks him. Again, like I was saying, the beginning half of this movie, some really good classic Indiana Jones stunt work. And it's made clear that this dude is supposed to be the Pat Roach of this movie. You know, Pat Roach, he was the big German Nazi dude in the first movie, and in the second movie he was the big Indian dude, and in the third movie, well, they cut his scene. But he was gonna be another big Nazi dude in that movie, and here they sadly didn't have Pat Roach, so they had this guy, and he's gonna be a big strong Russian dude that Indy's gonna go toe to toe with, and he does like 4 times throughout the course of this movie, he goes toe to toe with this guy, and it just doesn't work that well. I think the best fight that he had with this guy is when the ants are crawling everywhere and he's fighting them, and there's this ring because of the skull is commanding the ants to go around him. And that's the bare knuckle fight that really reminds you of Raiders of the Lost Ark. But the thing about the Pat Roach fights in the other movies is that he only has one fight with Indy. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, you only see him in that one scene, and in Temple of Doom, you do see him a little bit more because he's the big slave master of these kids, so there's foreshadowing there, but you only see him fight Indy once. Here, by the time you get to the stuff with the ants, you've already seen Indy dust this guy, wipe the floor with him a number of times really easily, so there's not really that much of a threat here. And before I talk about the ending of this movie, I want to bring it all the way back to the beginning of the movie for a second, because the opening in this movie is the first time where they fight that Russian guy, and I think that whole opening was a mistake. I don't think it's a bad scene. I think it's fine, and I think it's a good way to kick off the adventure that we have. But there is a tradition in Indiana Jones movies where the first 15 minutes, 20 minutes of a movie is a side adventure, something not really related to the main plot of the story. You're seeing another side story wrap up, Indy just handles some unfinished business that we catch him with, and then we go into the main plot. This movie doesn't do that, and I think it is a big mistake, because not only do we get too many encounters with Indy and the big Russian guy, it also makes the movie as a whole feel less adventurous, less like those serials it was based on. I always thought it was so cool that we never knew where we were going to pick up with Indy when we pop in the next DVD, whether he was in Shanghai, South America, or Utah back in his boyhood. It was always so cool to just see a little extra Indiana Jones adventures, a little extra creativity, an extra flavor, so that even if the main story isn't that great or kind of loses you, you at least have that other adventure that kind of makes it worth it. That's actually kind of how I feel about Temple of Doom. Temple of Doom, towards the end of the movie, it kind of starts to lose me a little bit. It's not terrible, but that Club Obi-Wan sequence in Shanghai, the whole Casablanca-inspired dinner jacket and flower and the trading, the very James Bond, that was probably the best part of that whole movie. And here we just don't get it. We only get the aliens. And actually, when I was watching this movie again, there was not one, but 2 options for an opening little sequence that actually does kind of tie into the movie as a whole. The first of which is when Indy and Mac, his sometimes friend, sometimes traitor guy that pals around with him, when they're talking about Berlin back in the day and how they were CIA double agents. That would have been nice to see, but I know what you're going to say. Oh, they were younger. That's probably World War II. Indy wouldn't look convincing. They didn't have that de-aging effect that they have now. So now I give you option 2. When Mutt gets Indy to go on this adventure, there's a bit of exposition saying that Ox had gone on this adventure and had found a skull, and then he's got to get it back and got wrapped up in prison. It would have been nice to see that, and maybe Indy went on that adventure with Oxley the first time, and to see how his brain kind of got scrambled, or at least see foreshadowing of that, so then when he shows up later, it's not so weird who's the stranger, that we actually do get to know who Harold was before the skull scrambled his brain, and maybe explain how Indy knows so much about Mayan culture and Mayan history and all that. It could have tied in, it could have been a little tangential, but again, it's Indiana Jones. You can make up some fun side quest that sets up things but doesn't set up things at the same time. That's the fun of it. But now I guess I'll just wrap up talking about the ending, and the ending is disappointing. They get to the city of gold, and it's not gold, it's knowledge, it's treasure, right? So it's all in the eye of the beholder. And it turns out that the gods that they worshipped were aliens, and you saw the alien skeletons, and they put the skull back on the alien, and you see an alien, and it looks at the Russian lady, and it burns her face. And that actually sounds a lot cooler than it actually is. You know, when you think about bad guy deaths, you think about faces melting or shriveling up or exploding or aging super fast before your eyes, turning into dust. This one, she just kind of gets some Ghost Rider flames over her eyes and she just kind of disappears. I'm not gonna lie, that's pretty lame, pretty disappointing. You could have really done something with her. It's been 20 years almost since the last Indiana Jones movie. I think people really wanted a memorable, gory death scene to really cap off this movie with. Even if they didn't buy into the aliens, they at least could appreciate a good practical death scene. And we don't get that here. And when they're just looking up into space, or the space between spaces, as Oxley puts it, it hit me that this is just Close Encounters again. Spielberg had already made this movie where a dude has an encounter with an alien, kind of messes up his mind, and he starts doing weird things, being all idiosyncratic. He's obsessed with going back to wherever back is and seeing them again. And when they finally get there, they have this big awe-inspiring moment, and they're looking up and there's a big ship, and it's all that Spielberg whimsy and wide-eyed optimism of, oh, what could they be? What could they be here for? And who are they? We may never know. And then the ship takes off, disappears, never to be seen again. And yeah, that's exactly what this movie is. It's Close Encounters of the Third Kind with an Indiana Jones coat of paint on it and with some of the Indiana Jones tropes. And the last thing I'll say is that despite its faults, and a lot of it is on a story level, I think Spielberg should have pushed a lot harder on Lucas to be like, listen, we gotta change things. This is not gonna read well. This is not gonna feel like Indiana Jones. This is not what we initially set out to do. And I know that's a really hard thing to do because they're such good friends and they want to do one more fun ride and they didn't want any conflict between them. They wanted to be on good terms, but I feel like the movie suffered because of that. However, there was passion put into this movie. George Lucas was passionate about this story. Steven Spielberg was passionate about doing another Indiana Jones movie and doing it to the best of his ability. Harrison Ford, passionate about giving one last Indiana Jones performance to go out on a high note, and he put in the work. Karen Allen, Shia LaBeouf, they all did the best they could with what they were giving, and it does show, and I do appreciate that because at least the people behind the camera, they cared. And that's something that really makes me nervous about this next Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I haven't seen it yet. I will see it eventually, but from what I've seen, Disney's output of Star Wars and Marvel and all of their other IP that they've just been mass producing, I'm skeptical that we're gonna get that same level of passion and creativity, for better or worse, that we got in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Because whether or not you like all of the creative choices that were made in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, I still believe that George Lucas and Steven Spielberg still know what's best for Indiana Jones. But now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. As always, I'm Colby. This is My Nerdy Talk, and I'll see you in the next video.